Communications Manager at the New York Community Media Alliance. Thanks for joining us today. We are delighted to organize this event in collaboration with our partners, the Fiscal Policy Institute and the SEIU 32BJ. As you all know, New York is a city of immigrants who have worked hard and participated fully in its economic development. Fiscal Policy Institute is a trusted name that has been documenting the contribution of immigrants to the economies of different states and large cities, including New York. Joining us today to release the Fiscal Policy Institute's latest data on the immigrants' contribution to the New York City's economy is David Khaled, Director, Immigration Research Initiative at the FBI. David is the principal researcher of this report titled Immigrants in the New York Metro Area Economy, Detailed by Country of Origin. Since 2007, David has led Fiscal Policy Institute's work on immigration and was principal author of Working for a Better Life, a profile of immigrants in the New York State economy. Also joining us today is Peter Kwong, Professor of Urban Affairs at Hunter College.
We had a report, actually this was the report. In 2007 we had a report that many of you saw looking at New York State and immigrants in New York State. And what we saw was an incredible diversity of immigration, not only in the countries of origin that people came from, but also in the economic role that people were playing. We saw immigrants contributing about a quarter of the state economy altogether and being very active participants in virtually every sector. So one of the questions that came up when we did this report was, well, that's New York. Isn't New York special and different? And wouldn't it be different if you looked at other parts of the United States? So we decided to do that, and in December we released a report looking at 25 largest metropolitan areas around the country. And what we saw was quite an astonishing degree of contribution in every metro area. In fact, I'll tell you a little bit about that as we go to the PowerPoint. Today what we're going to do is look into New York City and New York State, New York City and New York metropolitan area in particular, and give you a little bit more detail, especially one of the other questions that always comes up is, isn't it different depending on what country of origin you're talking about? You know, isn't it different when you're talking about whether it's people from Poland or from the Dominican Republic or from Jamaica? And there are, of course, some significant differences, and that's what we're going to look at today. So, can we put down the Chicago, Dallas, down to this? This is organized by size of the metropolitan area, so down to Pittsburgh, Portland, Cincinnati, Cleveland. And what you can see is there are two lines here. The black line represents the contribution of immigrants, and the white, the gray line, the contribution of U.S. born. And what you can see is, I'm sorry, let me say that again. The black line represents the immigrant share of the population, and the gray line represents the share of the economic output. And I can tell anybody who's interested how we gauge economic output is basically wages and proprietors' earnings is sort of a gauge of overall contribution to the economy. What you can see is that the economic contribution and the share of the population are right in line, which is what you would hope would happen, right? That there's not a, the immigrants are contributing in proportion to their numbers. So in places like New York or Los Angeles, where there are big numbers of immigrants, there's also a correspondingly big share of the economy. In places like St. Louis, Pittsburgh, Cincinnati, where there's a very small share of immigrants, immigrants are still contributing in proportion to their share. In fact, they're actually in those areas contributing a little bit more, and we can talk a little bit more about why that is later. In New York, the share, this is a chart, you have this in your packet also, by the way. So this shows the share of population, the share of economic output, and then what we call the immigrant economic contribution ratio. In other words, a ratio of 1 means that the share of the population is the same as the share of economic output. And I think, from my perspective, a share of 1 is pretty much what you'd like to see. It means people are, the immigrants are not doing better than U.S. born, but they're also not doing worse. They're basically the same. That ratio is almost the same. It's very up and down a little bit in different metro areas, but basically hovers around 1. In New York, it's actually, in the New York metropolitan area, the ratio is exactly 1.00. Immigrants are exactly contributing in relationship to their share of the population. So why is that? Let me just take a second to show you what the New York metropolitan area is. So New York metropolitan area is New York City, plus then basically the suburbs, and the one caveat there is that Newark is part of it also. So the city of Newark plus the suburbs, and then New York City. And we look at the metropolitan area because that's the labor market, right? That's where people are most likely to be working and living within that same metropolitan area. And we can break it out a little bit later on by city and suburbs, but this is the metropolitan area altogether. And I should tell you that what we're going to be able to do is give you data that you haven't been able to get before because of a couple of things. Because we're looking at a metropolitan area, which is a bigger region, because we're looking at 3 years of data combined, which gives you a bigger sample size, and then also we've combined occupations in a way that allows us to get a reasonable sample size in each of the occupations. So this is the first time we've been able to do this. So there's basically 2 factors in why economic contribution is so robust for immigrants. I'm going to focus on the second, but let me just say the first very clearly to begin with. The population, one big factor is that immigrants are more likely to be in the working age population. Right? A large number of immigrants come to the United States to work, and they come not as kids, they come as working age adults. There are not a lot of retirees, and there are not a lot of younger children here who are immigrants. So the population is not as big as the labor force. The share of the labor force in the New York metro area is 35%, even though the share of the population is 28%. And then here's the economic output in the bottom. So 28% and 28%, partly because the share of labor force is considerably bigger. And that's true on Long Island, in the 25 metro areas combined, and the United States as a whole. All right, so this is the occupational share of US and foreign-born workers in the New York metro area. And you have all this in your packet, so I'm sure you can't read all of the things, but this is, at the top, executive administrative jobs, professional specialties like doctors, lawyers, engineers, registered nurses, teachers, librarians, technicians. So this whole grouping is pretty high-end jobs. Sales, a little bit less so, sales jobs tend to be quite low-wage jobs, but they're higher-end sales, supervisors, administrative support, and clerical. Then you get into the service jobs, guards and building service workers, as represented by 32BJ here, private household workers, food preparation services in this group, and then blue-collar jobs down here, and at the very bottom, farming jobs, which in metropolitan areas is basically landscaping jobs. So you're looking at the foreign-born total and the US-born total. Right? The top is the foreign-born, the white is the foreign-born total, and the orange is the US-born total for the New York metropolitan area. So this is the data that we presented in December, and what you can see is it gives you the overall picture. Immigrants are quite well distributed throughout the entire economy, a little underrepresented among executives and teachers and professors, a little overrepresented actually among doctors and engineers, and pretty well spread, so that you can see why, this is the other big factor in why is the immigrant contribution in exact ratio to the immigrant share of the economy. It's because they have a much wider range of jobs than people might expect them to, and then also they're a little bit more concentrated in the working age population. All right, this is the last one that's like, so this is now looking at people by country of birth. Right, so this is New York metro area, according to their share of their labor force. Right, so the biggest representation is people from the Dominican Republic, Mexico, India, China, Jamaica, Ecuador, Colombia, Guyana, Philippines, Haiti, El Salvador, Korea, Trinidad and Tobago, Poland, Peru, Italy, Russia, Ukraine, Pakistan, Cuba, and then we have the totals at the bottom. And actually we also ran the numbers for Puerto Rico, which is part of the United States, but a big part of the Hispanic population, Latino population in New York, and we felt like it would be useful to have that as a comparison. So these are, I'm going to just go through a few of these in detail now, but the packet has detail about every single one of these, and in fact we can give you a little bit more if you have follow-up questions. So let's look at people from the Dominican Republic to begin with, so the largest share of the labor force among immigrants. And what you can see is